I never thought I'd be the guy to do something like this. But life has a way of pushing you to extremes you never imagined possible. My name's Jack, and this is the story of how I went from being a devoted husband to orchestrating the most elaborate revenge plot of my life. It all started on a crisp autumn evening in New York City. I was rushing home from my job at a mid-level advertising firm, clutching a bouquet of lilies, Zara's favorite. Our 5th anniversary was coming up, and I wanted to surprise her with an impromptu date night. As I hurried up the steps to our brownstone, I couldn't help but smile, thinking about how lucky I was to be married to such an incredible woman. Zara had it all: brains, beauty, and an infectious charm that could light up any room. When we first met at a mutual friend's gallery opening, I was instantly smitten. She was confidently holding court in a group of off-world elites, her blonde hair catching the light as she laughed at something witty someone had said. I remember thinking she was way out of my league, but somehow I mustered up the courage to introduce myself. To my surprise, we hit off immediately. Zara was fascinated by my work in advertising, peppering me with questions about the creative process and the psychology behind effective campaigns. I was equally enthralled by her passion for corporate law and the way she could break down complex legal concepts into layman's terms. Our whirlwind romance led to a fairy tale wedding just a year later. I still pinch myself sometimes, wondering how I managed to land such an amazing partner. Zara's career took off like a rocket after we got married. She made partner at her prestigious law firm in record time, earning a reputation as a fierce litigator who could strike fear into the hearts of even the most seasoned opponents. I was so proud of her accomplishments, always cheering her on from the sidelines. Sure, my own career wasn't advancing at quite the same pace, but I was content. I loved my work in advertising, even if I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder as quickly as Zara. We were a team, and her success was our success. At least that's what I thought. As I turned the key in the lock that fateful evening, I had no idea that I was about to witness the first cracks in the foundation of our seemingly perfect marriage. "Zara?" I called out, stepping into the foyer. "I'm home early. I thought we could go out for dinner tonight." The sound of muffled voices drifted from the living room. Zara wasn't alone. I paused, not wanting to interrupt if she was in the middle of a work call. But then I heard her laugh, that bright tinkling laugh that had first drawn me to her, followed by a man's deep chuckle. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly made my way down the hallway. The living room door was ajar, and I could see Zara perched on the edge of the sofa, a glass of red wine in hand. Across from her sat a man I recognized as James, one of the senior partners at her firm. They were sitting closer than what I'd consider professionally appropriate, their heads bent together in conspiratorial whispers. I was about to announce my presence when Zara's words stopped me cold. "Oh, James," she giggled, taking a sip of her wine. "You wouldn't believe how exhausting it is sometimes, playing the doting wife to someone so ordinary." My heart dropped to my stomach. Ordinary? Is that how she saw me? James leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. "I can only imagine. How do you stand it? A woman of your caliber, married to a man who was barely scraping by in a dying industry." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Barely scraping by? Sure, I wasn't making partner money, but I contributed my fair share to her household. And advertising was far from a dying industry. We were constantly evolving and adapting to new technologies. Zara sighed dramatically. "It's not easy, let me tell you. Just last week we were at the Johnsons' dinner party, and Jack spent the entire evening rambling on about some inane ad campaign he's working on. I swear I saw Margaret stifle a yawn behind her napkin. They both erupted into laughter, and I felt my face burn with shame and anger. I remembered that dinner party. I thought I'd been engaging in stimulating conversation about the challenges of marketing in the digital age. Had everyone really found me that boring? "Well," James said, his voice dropping to a husky tone, "you know my offer still stands. Ditch the dead weight and come work for me exclusively. I could use a personal assistant of your caliber." The implications of his words were clear, and I waited with bated breath for Zara's response. Surely she would shut him down, defend our marriage. But Zara just smiled coyly. "Tempting, James. Very tempting. But you know I can't just walk away. There are Complications. Ah yes, the print-up. James nodded knowingly. Quite the ironclad agreement you've got there. Though I'm sure with your legal expertise we could find a way around it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only was my wife openly disparaging me to her colleague, but they were discussing ways to circumvent our prenuptial agreement. The same agreement Zara had insisted on to protect her assets, claiming it was just good business sense. My hands were shaking as I clutched the bouquet of lilies. I wanted to burst into the room, to confront them both. But something held me back. A small, rational part of my brain whispered that I needed to be smart about this. That I needed more information before I acted. So, swallowing my pride and my anger, I silently retreated. I slipped out of the house as quietly as I had entered, tossing the wilted lilies into a trash can on the street corner. That night marked the beginning of the end. Or perhaps the beginning of something new. A version of myself I never knew existed. As I wandered the streets of New York, my mind raced with questions and doubts. Had Zara always felt this way about me? Was our entire marriage a shun? I found myself in a dingy bar, nursing a whiskey and replaying every moment of our relationship in my head. Looking back, I started to notice patterns I'd been too blind to see before. The subtle put-downs, the backhanded compliments, the way she'd dismiss my opinions in front of our friends. Trouble in paradise. The gruff voice of the bartender pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. I looked up, meeting the weathered gaze of a man who'd probably seen his fair share of broken hearts darken his bar's doorstep. "You could say that," I muttered. He nodded sagely, refilling my glass without asking. "Let me guess. Worn troubles." I barked out a harsh laugh. "Is it that obvious?" The bartender, his name tag read Lou, shrugged. "Seen it 1,000 times, kid. The look in your eyes says it all." "So, what's her name?" "Sarah," I said, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. "My wife." Lou raised an eyebrow. "Ah, the plot thickens. What'd she do? Cheat on you?" I shook my head, then paused. "Not physically. At least, I don't think so. But emotionally. Yeah, I guess you could say that." I found myself spilling the whole sordid tale to Lou, who listened with the patience of a seasoned confessor. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "That's rough, kid. Real rough. So, what are you gonna do about it?" I stared into my empty glass, feeling lost. "I don't know. Confront her. Ask for a divorce." Lou snorted and let her walk all over you again. "Nah, kid. What you need is a plan." I looked up, intrigued. "A plan?" "Yeah, a plan. You said she's got this ironclad prenup, right? And she's been talking about you behind your back, maybe even thinking about leaving you high and dry?" I nodded slowly, not sure where he was going with this. Lou leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Then you gotta beat her at her own game. Gather evidence. Build your case. And when the time is right, you strike." A small part of me recoiled at the idea. This wasn't who I was. I didn't plot and scheme, did I? But a larger part, the part still reading from the betrayal I'd witnessed, latched onto Lou's words like a lifeline. "How?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lou's eyes glinted with a mixture of sympathy and mischief. "First things first, kid. You act like nothing's changed. You go home, you play the loving husband. All the while you're gathering intel. Get yourself a good lawyer. Not one from her firm, mind you. Start documenting everything. And I mean everything." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of clarity cutting through the alcohol-induced haze. "And then what?" "And then," Lou said, a grim smile spreading across his face. "You plan the perfect moment to pull the rug out from under her. Make it big. Make it public. Show her and everyone else that you're not the pushover she thinks you are." As Lou laid out the broad strokes of what would become my revenge plan, I felt a transformation beginning within me. The naive, trusting Jack was fading away, replaced by someone more calculating, more determined. I left the bar that night with a newfound sense of purpose. I had no idea if I could pull off what Lou was suggesting. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be anyone's fool anymore. The next few months were a masterclass in deception. I threw myself into my role as the oblivious, doting husband with a fervor that would have impressed even the most seasoned method actor. All the while, I was meticulously building my case against Sarah. I hired a private investigator to track her movements and document any potential infidelities. I installed hidden cameras in our home, capturing every snide comment and disdainful look she threw my way when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I even managed to gain access to her work emails, uncovering a trail of unprofessional correspondence with James that bordered on harassment. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of my plan was maintaining my composure in the face of Sarah's increasingly blatant disrespect. She seemed to take my continued devotion as a sign that she could push the boundaries even further. One particularly memorable incident occurred at a charity gala hosted by her law firm. Sarah had insisted I attend, claiming it would be good for my limited networking skills. I should have known she had an ulterior motive. As we mingled with the crowd of legal and business elites, Sarah kept me close, her arm linked through minor display of marital unity. But every introduction was laced with subtle digs at my expense. "This is my husband Jack," she'd say, a smile not quite reaching her eyes. "He works in advertising. Nothing as exciting as what we do, of course, but someone has to convince people to buy things they don't need, right?" I'd laugh along, playing the role of the good-natured husband who could take a joke. But inside I was seething. Each backhanded compliment, each dismissive gesture, was fuel for the fire of my revenge. The breaking point came when we encountered James at the bar. He greeted Sarah with a familiarity that made my skin crawl, barely acknowledging my presence. "Sarah, darling, you look absolutely ravishing tonight," he purred, his eyes raking over her form-fitting gown. Sarah preened under his attention. "Why, thank you, James. You're looking quite dashing yourself." I cleared my throat, reminding them of my presence. James finally deigned to look in my direction, his smile turning condescending. "Ah, Jack, good to see you. How's the ad game treating you these days? Still trying to convince people they need another useless gadget?" Before I could respond, Sarah jumped in. "Oh, Jack, he's still plodding away at his little campaigns. But let's talk about something more interesting. I heard you just won the Carlisle case. That must have been quite the courtroom drama." And just like that, I was dismissed from the conversation. I stood there, feeling increasingly invisible as Sarah and James dove into a discussion about legal strategy that might as well have been in a foreign language for all I could contribute. As I watched them, their heads bent close together, laughing at some inside joke, I felt a cold determination settle over me. This would be one of the last times Sarah would ever have the opportunity to humiliate me like this. I was done being the punchline to her jokes, the anchor weighing down her social ascent. I excused myself, claiming I needed some air, and made my way to a quiet corner of the ballroom. There, I sent a quick text to my private investigator, instructing him to pay extra close attention to Sarah's interactions with James in the coming weeks. Little did Sarah know, but her performance at this gala was providing me with invaluable ammunition for my impending counterattack. Each sly remark, each lingering touch with James was being meticulously documented by the PI I had discreetly hired to monitor the event. As I rejoined the party, plastering on a smile that felt more like a grimace, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. How had we come to this? The woman laughing with James bore little resemblance to the Sarah I had fallen in love with, or had that Sarah ever really existed? Had I been blind to her true nature all along? These questions haunted me as I navigated the rest of the evening, playing the role of the supportive spouse, while inwardly counting down the days until I could finally break free from this charade. The weeks following the gala were a biller of clandestine meetings and careful preparations. I met with my lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa who came highly recommended for her expertise in high-profile divorces. When I laid out the evidence I had gathered so far, her eyebrows trot up in surprise. "Mr. Anderson," she said, a note of admiration in her voice, "I have to say I'm impressed. Most clients come to me with suspicions and maybe a few incriminating text messages. You've brought me a veritable treasure trove of evidence." I felt a surge of pride at her words, quickly followed by a pang of guilt. Was I really doing the right thing? Was all this deception and plotting really necessary? But then I remembered Sarah's laugh as she mocked me to James, the casual cruelty in her voice where she dismissed my career, and my resolve hardened once more. What's our next move? I asked Vanessa, leaning forward in my chair. She tapped her pen against her notepad. Her brow furrowed in thought. We need to time this perfectly. You mentioned your anniversary is coming up. I nodded. Next month. Sarah's been talking about throwing a big party to celebrate. All our friends, her colleagues, it's shaping up to be quite the event. A slow smile spread across Vanessa's face. That could be exactly the opportunity we need. A public setting with all the key players present. It's perfect. As Vanessa outlined her strategy, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation building in my chest. This was really happening. After months of planning and pretending, I was finally going to take control of my life again. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. While Sarah busied herself with party planning, I was putting the final touches on my own preparations. I had evidence carefully organized, statements prepared, and a rock-solid case built against her. The night before our anniversary, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of Sarah's presence beside me. She slept peacefully, unaware of the storm that was about to break over her head. As the first light of dawn crept through our curtains, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what happened today, I would walk out of this with my dignity intact. Sarah had underestimated me for the last time. The day of our anniversary dawned bright and clear, a beautiful June morning that gave no hint of the drama about to unfold. I went through the motions of our usual routine, surprising Sarah with breakfast in bed and a small gift. A pair of earrings she had been eyeing. "Oh Jack," she cooed, pecking me on the cheek. "They're lovely. You shouldn't have." I smiled, the expression not quite reaching my eyes. "Only the best for you, darling. Happy anniversary." As Sarah bustled about, finalizing details for the party, I retreated to my home office, ostensibly to finish up some work before the guests arrived. In reality, I was running through my plan one last time. As the hours ticked by, my anxiety grew. I paced the confines of my office, rehearsing what I would say, imagining every possible scenario. My palms were sweaty and my heart raced. Was I really going to go through with this? Could I really dismantle my entire life in front of everyone we knew? A soft knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. "Jack," Sarah's voice called out. "The first guests will be here soon. Are you ready?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Yes, dear," I replied, impressed by how steady my voice sounded. "I'll be right out." As I opened the door, I was momentarily taken aback by Sarah's appearance. She looked stunning in a sleek black dress, her hair swept up in elegant duckdo. For a brief moment, I was transported back to our wedding day, when I had been awestruck by her beauty and so full of hope for our future together. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly as she took in my appearance. "Is that what you're wearing?" she asked, her tone laced with disapproval. And just like that, the spell was broken. I glanced down at my carefully chosen outfit, a sharp suit that I knew brought out the best in my appearance. "What's wrong with it?" I asked, feigning innocence. She sighed, reaching out to straighten my tie. "Nothing, I suppose. I just thought you might make more of an effort for our anniversary." I bit back the retort that sprang to my lips, instead forcing a smile. "Sorry, darling, I'll try to do better next time." Sarah's answering smile was patronizing. "Of course you will. Now come on, we need to greet our guests." As we made our way downstairs, I could hear the murmur of voices and the clink of glasses. Our home was filled with the crème de la crème of New York's legal and business world. Sarah's colleagues, clients, and our so-called friends. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the heady scent of success. I plastered on my best host smile, shaking hands and making small talk as Sarah led me around the room. With each introduction, each backhanded compliment about my quaint career in advertising, I felt my resolve strengthen. These people had no idea what was about to hit them. As the evening wore on, I watched Sarah in her element. She flitted from group to group, a laugh tinkling through the air, her charm on full display. To an outsider, we must have looked like the perfect power couple, the brilliant lawyer and her supportive husband. But I could see the cracks in the fade, the way Sarah's smile tightened when she introduced me, the subtle eye rolls when I tried to contribute to the conversation, the lingering touches and meaningful glances she shared with James, who had arrived fashionably late and immediately commanded attention. I bided my time, playing the role of the dutiful husband to perfection. I fetched drinks, laughed at jokes at my expense, and stood by silently as Sarah regaled our guests with stories of her latest courtroom victories. Finally, as the party reached its peak, Sarah clinked her glass for attention. Everyone, she called out, her voice carrying effortlessly over the crowd. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate our anniversary." She turned to me, a smile dazzling but her eyes cold. "Jack darling, these past 5 years have been quite the journey. Why don't you say a few words?" This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I could feel Vanessa's eyes on me from across the room, giving me a subtle nod. It was now or never. I stepped forward, taking the glass of champagne Sarah offered me. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure everyone could hear it. But when I spoke, my voice was calm and clear. "Thank you, Sarah." I began, looking out over the sea of expectant faces. "You're right, it has been quite the journey. In fact, I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately on our marriage and the path that brought us here." I could see confusion flicker across Sarah's face. This wasn't the meek, appreciative speech she had been expecting. "You see," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "I've always believed that a marriage should be built on mutual respect, trust, and support. Unfortunately, I've come to realize that our marriage lacks all of these fundamental elements." A hushed murmur rippled through the crowd. Sarah's smile had frozen in place, her eyes darting nervously between me and our guests. "Jack," she hissed, reaching for my arm. "What are you doing?" I gently shook off her touch, my gaze never leaving the audience. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago, Sarah. I'm standing up for myself." With that, I launched into my carefully prepared speech. I laid bare all of Sarah's transgressions, the constant belittling, the emotional manipulation, the not-so-subtle flirtations with James. With each revelation, I could see the shock and discomfort growing on the faces of our guests. "But don't just take my word for it," I said, my voice ringing out in the now silent room. "I have proof." At my signal, Vanessa stepped forward, distributing packets of evidence to key individuals in the room. Emails, photographs, witness statements, all meticulously compiled and irrefutably damning. Sarah's face had drained of all color. "Jack, stop this right now," she demanded, her voice shaking. "You're embarrassing yourself." I turned to her, meeting her gaze steadily. "No, Sarah. For the first time in years, I'm not embarrassed. I'm not ashamed. I'm finally standing up for myself." As the evidence made its way around the room, I could see the tide of opinion turning. Shocked whispers and disapproving looks were now directed at Sarah, not me. Her carefully crafted image was crumbling before her eyes. "And so," I concluded, my voice filled with the confidence I had long forgotten I possessed, "I stand before you all tonight, not to celebrate an anniversary, but to announce the end of our marriage. Sarah, consider this my declaration of independence. I've already filed for divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. James had disappeared into the background, no doubt trying to distance himself from the unfolding scandal. As for me, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. The weight I'd been carrying for so long was finally lifted. I was free. The aftermath of my announcement was chaos. Guests began to leave in droves, murmuring awkward apologies and avoiding eye contact. Sarah's colleagues huddled in corners, no doubt already calculating the professional fallout of this very public humiliation. Through it all, I stood my ground, accepting words of support from those brave enough to offer them. Vanessa was by my side, handling any legal questions and ensuring that Sarah didn't try to retaliate in the heat of the moment. As the last of the guests trickled out, I found myself alone with Sarah in the wreckage of our anniversary party. She stood in the middle of the room, her perfect composure shattered, mascara streaking her cheeks. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "To us?" I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. I saw not the confident, successful woman who had dazzled me at that gallery opening, but a scared, insecure person who had built her entire identity on the belittlement of others. "I didn't do this to her, Sarah," I said softly. "You did. Every time you mocked me, every time you made me feel small, every time you chose your image over our partnership. This is the consequence of your actions." She crumpled then, sinking to the floor in a heap of expensive fabric and broken pride. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to take her in my arms like I would have done in the past. But I knew that chapter of my life was closed. Instead, I turned and walked out of the house that had been our home, leaving Sarah to face the ruins of the life she had so carelessly gambled away. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt a sense of exhilaration. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited to see where it might lead. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media speculation, and personal reconstruction. As I had anticipated, the story of our very public divorce became fodder for gossip columns and legal blogs alike. Sarah's reputation took a significant hit, with several high-profile clients quietly taking their business elsewhere. I, on the other hand, found myself the unexpected recipient of admiration and support. Colleagues I had always assumed looked down on me reached out with words of encouragement. Potential clients, impressed by my strategic thinking and execution, began to approach me with job offers. But more importantly than any professional gains, I was finally free to rediscover who I was as an individual. I moved into a small but comfortable apartment, relishing the ability to decorate and live as I pleased without fear of criticism. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during my marriage, their presence reminding me of the person I used to be before I lost myself in Sarah's shadow. One sunny afternoon, about 6 months after that fateful anniversary party, I found myself back at Lou's bar. The grizzled bartender's eyes lit up with recognition as I took a seat at the counter. "Well, well," he chuckled, sliding a whiskey my way without being asked. "If it isn't the man of the hour. I've been reading about you in the papers, kid. Gotta say, I'm impressed." I smiled, raising the glass in a toast. "I couldn't have done it without your advice, Lou. You helped me find the courage to stand up for myself." Lou waved away my thanks. "Nah, that was all you, kid. I just gave you a little nudge in the right direction. So how does it feel to be a free man?" I took a thoughtful sip of my drink, considering the question. "Honestly, it feels amazing. Scary sometimes, sure, but mostly it feels like I can finally breathe again." Lou nodded sagely. "That's the thing about toxic relationships. You don't realize how much they're suffocating you until you're out." We fell into a companionable silence, the afternoon sun streaming through the bar's grimy windows. As I sat there, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. Yes, I had lost the woman I thought was the love of my life. Yes, I had endured public scrutiny and private pain. But in the process, I have found something far more valuable myself. The path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in years, I was excited about the possibilities. I had rediscovered my passion for advertising, throwing myself into projects with the creativity and enthusiasm I thought I had lost. I was making new friends, exploring new hobbies, and slowly but surely building a life that was authentically mine. As for Sarah, I heard through the grapevine that she had taken a leave of absence from her firm, ostensibly to focus on personal matters. James, it seemed, had wasted no time in distancing himself from the scandal, already seen about town with a new young associate on his arm. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy for Sarah. Despite everything, I knew that the public humiliation and professional setbacks must be taking a toll on her. But then I remembered all the times she had carelessly trampled on my feelings, all the years I had been